Thank you, Steve. As always, very happy to be here. And welcome to our panelists. Before I get into asking all of you a bunch of questions about flexible working, I do want to take the time to get each of you to introduce yourselves and then very briefly describe your company's policy on flexibility, whether you do hybrid, there's a mandated number of days in the office, if you're all in office, just so we can get a sense of the type of environment everybody is working in. So let's start with Kelly at Aflac. Tell us more about what you do there and your work arrangement.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kelly Henderson, and I'm the Vice President of Total Rewards for Aflac, and that is our broad-based compensation teams as well as employee benefits and employee wellness. For our work designations, for employees that are within 50 miles of an Aflac office, they are required to work a hybrid arrangement, which for us is a 60% a week in office arrangement. So we allow a little bit of flexibility at the team area to say what days of the week, but it is a 60% requirement.
Thanks, Kelly. Seema.
Hi, thanks for having me on. So Seema Bansali, I am with Henry Schein. For those of you who don't know who we are a global distributor of healthcare supplies and solutions. We're in 32 countries. We have about 25,000 team members across the globe. And our workforce is distributed. We have folks on the front line in warehouses, picking and packing and doing the real tough work. They're in every day. We have some folks that are every day, and then we have team members who are sales team members who are in the car. And then we have hybrid workforce. So it depends on what your role is. But for us, hybrid is very different. Managers get to determine whether or not you're hybrid. And it's up to them and their line. And how many days a week? We just require, if you're hybrid, that you're in the office 1 day a week. So that's how we determine, although we also have a 50-mile radius as a marker for whether or not you can, get reimbursed for commuting. But that's how we do hybrid at Henry Schein.
Thanks, Seema. Michael.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Mike Watson from Eightfold. I am the Senior Director of Customer Success. I was the very first customer success person hired at Eightfold because I'm a former customer. So the first 25 years of my career was all on the HR side. So been there and done that and know what you're going through. As far as our setup, because we're in the Bay Area, giving a mile distance, if I said, hey, you're within 50 miles, sometimes that could take you 3 hours in Bay Area traffic. So we've cut it down by how long it takes you to commute into the office. So if you are within an hour's commute, we would ask that you be in the office a couple days a week. If you're within between an hour and a half, we would ask for 1 day. And anything beyond that, we say, hey, come in as you'd like. If you want to join the office, please do. But anything beyond that, we'd say, hey, save the windshield time, be more productive at home, get a little bit more work-life balance back, and see what we can do.
Thanks, Michael. TJ.
Good afternoon. My name is TJ Mercer. I'm the Director of EEDI, business partner for our operations group here at AbbVie. So AbbVie is a biopharmaceutical company. We have about 55,000 global employees. Operations group makes up about 15,000 of those. And so we have a multitude of different work environments. We do have individuals that work remotely, full time. We have some that are hybrid. Myself, I'm a hybrid. I'm in my home office, actually in my wife's home office today. But we also we have plants and operations, and so that requires individuals to be there and hands-on in what we're producing. And so the primary thing is to make sure that the work is getting done, but then also right behind that, I would consider 1B is to make sure that our employees are enjoying a great work-life balance and being able to take advantage of what remote work and other entities can offer. But pleasure to be here today.
Happy to have all of you. I'm going to come right back to TJ to get started. Let's begin with this. In your view, what are the pros and cons of hybrid work and some of the new types of flexibility we've seen since 2020?
Wow. Okay. Easy question to start. There's tons of pros and cons. I'll start from my lens specifically. So most of my background has been in talent acquisition, talent management, other HR functions along that. Right now, I serve in a diversity role. But from a talent standpoint, it's really stretched and transformed the way in which we're able to go and adapt and find talent, right? And so I grew up in St. Louis. I left St. Louis after I graduated for a few different reasons, mostly because of I would call it the recession. It was 2009, and I came to Chicago because there was just more opportunities, right? I felt like there was a better opportunity to kind of compete and do that. When you think about when remote work really, really kind of took off, obviously during like the COVID period, one of the great pros is that there's a lot of regional talent that went back to a lot of these like Midwest cities, right? So if you grew up in a St. Louis and you wanted to be near family, if you grew up in, Lexington, or you grew up in, Charlotte, these places that don't maybe have some of the same headquarters as you do in, say, like in Chicago or Atlanta or San Francisco, there's opportunities for you. You can still be with a premier company. You can still apply for those positions. You can still kind of go from there. I will say one of the cons to that, however, is I've worked at an organization for 2.5 years and never got to see anybody out of the purple box or the blue Zoom box or things as far as that goes. And one of the things I loved about being in the office was that when a meeting started, it wasn't straight to the meeting. So if I was to have a scheduled meeting for a half an hour with Michael, we're probably going to jump in. We're going to get right to it, right? Because that's our scheduled time to do that. It's limited opportunities where I stop by and I ask Michael how was his weekend. We get to know each other. I know his kids are playing soccer, or this is happening, or that's happening. Like some of that small talk just doesn't really happen as organically or naturally, and I think that people they do miss that from time to time. But again, I think the pros and cons historically have kind of balanced themselves out. But those are some that come kind of like top of mind for me.
Sure. Anyone else while TJ was speaking, think of anything he said resonate with you? Any other pros and cons that came to mind as he was speaking, Seema?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you said is people are feeling. I think the other one of the pros, certainly from a diversity and inclusion lens, a lot of folks have um, needs at home that they need to be there, so it's a real pro on that end. But I would say um, I don't know if I'd call it a con. I think there's a way around it, but I think one of the bigger issues is how do you keep connected? I mean, we're here more and more around wellness, that relationships are the key to being healthy. They're a really important part of it, and Surgeon General's come out with that. So I think one of the cons is you don't actually get to be, as TJ said already, that he hasn't seen anybody outside the box. You don't really get to see people that often. And what does that do for your wellness in terms of relationships and relationship building? I think that is one of the balance issues that we have to still work out.
Sure. What recommendations do you have then, Seema, for how HR can help facilitate relationship building, especially since, you know, you're remote yourself? How do you get people connected? How do you encourage people to do that on a regular basis? And can it be replicated, the type of thing that happens in the office?
Yeah. So just a caveat that I work outside of HR in the office of the CEO, but I will say broadly for anybody in the people field, um, that the big question is how do we maintain our culture? How do we maintain our culture and how do we come together as people? And I think you have to be really intentional about it. So number one, we are really intentional about living our values, and we don't just talk about them in everything that we do. We tag our values on the screen. We put our values into action so people can see how we live our values and what they are. Because when we do that, the new team members coming on start to understand who we are and how we live. And that's really important. So they understand how we interact with each other. They understand what we put as important for us. Our values fall under 3 pillars: community, caring, and career. It's very simple for folks to understand. And then we bring together either virtually or in person for something we do called connection days. And actually, I'm in the office today because we just did a connection day today in this afternoon where we were building kits for our team members who were impacted by the recent storms in the Southeast. So we got folks together, we build care kits for them that we'll be sending out. And we try to do these across the globe in different ways, culturally relevant ways, with some frequency. So people have the opportunity to come in and come together and be together. But for those folks who are remote and away, we also engage people remotely. We have a games platform called the Henry Schein Games, where everybody's assigned to a team. Team Esther and Team Henry, they're the founders of Henry Schein. And they compete all throughout the year for different things. And so they're connected remotely through that. They can talk to each other. They can see who's winning. There's lots of different ways. So we try to be really intentional about how are we setting the culture? What do we want people to experience? And then how are we making sure it's good for folks who are in person, folks who are hybrid, and folks who are fully remote? You need to have an integrated strategy for that.
Kelly, when you introduced yourself and talked about Aflac's policy on in-office work, you described a 60% policy. So when workers report to the office, what are expectations about how they spend their time? Is it any different than working remotely? How does that work?
Yeah, we really try to work with our employees to understand how to use their time when they're in the office versus at home. And we want to set it up where when you're in office, we're having in-person meetings. We're getting together to talk and have those conversations. Like TJ mentioned, how important some of those conversations are. So what we don't want to have happen is you drive an hour to the office, you sit in your office with the door closed on Zoom calls all day, right? So we've got to be really intentional, and we're asking our leaders to make sure that they're designing events and activities where they're together. It's a balance though, because you want to give people flexibility and freedom to schedule their weeks, right? But what I try to say is at least one day a week, everybody on a team needs to be in the office. And that's the day that you have your team meetings, right? So there's things that you have to be really purposeful about. It does take a little bit more time, a little bit more coordination and organization, but we have seen the benefits from trying to do it that way.
Have you had any pushback on folks wanting to come into the office? And if so, how do you respond to that?
Oh, yes. I think when we all came back out of COVID, when everybody was working remote, we announced it last March that we were going to have the 60% return to the office. Our executive team really saw the importance of bringing people together, having people work together. And we got a ton of pushback from our employees because they were like, we have been doing our job successfully for years, 100% remote. So you're telling me I'm not doing my job well? So we had to have a lot of conversations around just what we talked about, the importance of coming together to be able to collaborate. So, when we first did it, there was a little bit of concern that we may have people leave the organization because they wanted to maintain a fully remote role. So we even went through our exit interviews and added a reason for wanting to stay fully remote. And thankfully, we really did not lose very many people. It was under 10 employees that left because they wanted to be remote. So I think as much as you hear griping and complaining, we work really hard to show the importance of being in the office so people understand.
Yeah, and
Michael,
if I can add to that real quick, I think one thing that you can do is if there's any type of stats that you have as an organization that you can say, hey, here was our production pre-COVID, and here's our production post-COVID, and God bless all of you, you've been working really hard. But we do see that it's a 15% decline since we've all moved remote. And we're trying to cut down on that delta. I think if you use some stats, instead of just saying, well, hey, the manager just wants to see you in the office. Like that doesn't work anymore, right? I mean, think about this. If there's one thing that hasn't changed too much, it's work, right? Thousands of years, show up, do a job, go home. While everything else around us has changed, the pace of technology, innovation, everything has changed, but the work structure has stayed the same. So I do think that it's high time for us to revisit that. And I think that it just can't be about, well, this is the way it used to be, and I'd love to see you now, and I'm the boss, and you should do that. Like, to me, that's not the type of organization that I'd want to work in or right. But if the organization came to me and said, Mike, love the work you're doing, Would love to see if it's able for you to come back in, right? Let's have individual conversations. Let's understand everyone's circumstances. Like, hey, I got a mom that's got Alzheimer's right now and is, on the tail end of that. And, guys, yeah, I'm 15 minutes from the office, but I'm helping taking care of mom. And once this is taken care of itself, then we'll talk about how often you'll see me, right? I mean, it's having an individual conversation like that you just can't have a blanket policy. So I'll stop there, but I think everything that everyone has said here so far has been spot on.
Yeah,
What
and
about
I agree with you, Mike, and we struggled with that too, just from, okay, what stats can we show? We're a people culture. We do a lot, it's a lot about relationships. It's hard to kind of tie it back to actual production. And so that's what we had to rely on, something to say, okay, this is the reason. And not just a manager say, hey, come in so we can have meetings. I see it all the time, like out, there's cubes out here. When you see them all standing up and talking and working through a solution, and I'll walk out there and say, yeah, you couldn't do this when you were at home, could you? And, they're like, yeah.
I send a Slack and I sit there and wait for the little box to pop
Right,
up
watching the bubbles,
that they're typing, and then it disappears. I'm like, where'd you go? You have my answer, right? So
exactly.
totally get it. Right. And one last thing on that. Look, if the stats show that you're doing more by being remote, also share that as well and say, folks, from a productivity standpoint, we're knocking it out of the park. What I'm concerned about is people's mental health, being locked up. I mean, I live in a beautiful place. I'm on 2 acres here. I'm on a farm. It's my dream place. But if I don't get out of here when work is over, out into the real world, it's like sitting in a place with bars. It doesn't matter, right? We have to have those interactions as humans to really fulfill everything we need in life.
TJ, what would you add?
No, I think everything. I mean, one of the things we talk about with like productivity, which is like another pro, right? So like when you think about the hybrid model, you see people standing up and they're all gathering, they're all talking, right? We also have been in those environments where like that person that is always kind of buzzing around the office that looks super, super busy, right? But their numbers are the exact same as the person that does come in and sit at their desk, right? And so when we get into fourth quarter now, we do end of year review type stuff, right? We're starting to see more transparently like who's actually doing what with some of those numbers, right? And so I've seen, retention go down at several companies I've consulted with because people are at the end of the year and upset because, Joe whoever or Samantha whoever, got a promotion over them and their numbers are the exact same and the manager couldn't articulate why this person got that, right? And so now those intangibles and those different kind of things are really starting to show up. And it's specifically when you start talking about, biases and different things within it. Like we've seen a huge increase in women promotions. Obviously, our underserved communities, we're seeing those as well too. And so it's one of those type of things. But I'll say one of the points that Michael said is so key. Like I have a 4.5 and 2.5-year-old, and I'm new to AbbVie, but I was very, very transparent and upfront during my interview process, like things I'm not willing to miss, right? So like I love picking my kids up from school. Like that energizes me for what I have to do in the evening, right? The hug that I get in the morning before I go off to work, like that gives me what I need to do what I want to do, right? And so it's not to say that I get to do it every day, all day, but if you're telling me I'm just gonna miss all his soccer games because our office is not 15 minutes away, maybe it's 40 minutes away, and I have to be in there every single day. Like that's like a non-negotiable for me, right? And I know that my parents sacrificed different things as I was growing up because work was work, and that was kind of what was preached. Like you sacrifice, you do what you need to do to search and things. But I would say it's not really me. Like I've gone on like a field trip and the teacher pointed out, and she was just like, "This is the craziest ratio of like dads to moms that I've seen." Right, like, which I think is awesome, right? Like, I love being a dad, and my friends love being dads, and the studies and the information that's out there shows how much more active maybe fathers have been over this last like generation. And it's not to say that moms are not being as active. It's great seeing both. Like, it's me and my wife or me, or you see partners and they're together and they're cheering with their kids and they're doing that, and you're gonna, I think, see and hear a lot less of, well, mom couldn't make these because she was in this profession and she was doing this, or like dad couldn't there because he was in this profession doing that. You're seeing everybody at all times. And I think it does increase productivity. And I think it definitely, just puts people in a different mindset to really want to go out and do the best for their organization because the company's taking care of them as well.
Yeah, and TJ, if I can add to that, right? I think after we all went through a pandemic and we saw how fleeting life can be,
Right.
and all of a sudden we know that, and I'm going to be a little bit morbid here for a second, and I apologize. If something was to happen to me tomorrow, yes, Eightfold would mourn. Within 2 weeks, they'd have a new position open, and they'd be trying to backfill me, and they'd be moving forward, and right, my family is going to think about me and mourn me forever, right? And so when we have to make decisions like that, right, we're now putting it through this lens of watching everything being taken away from us in COVID, losing people at the drop of a hat, all of a sudden to come back and realize that, yeah, it works great. They're giving me a paycheck and they care about me, but they don't care about me more than these people that I don't see more than work, right? I see these people that I love and I care for 2 days a week. And I see these people that I'm great friends with and I make my career with 5 days a week, right? So I think just going through that experience of a global pandemic made people really kind of shift and say, you know what? It's really about family for me. And if I have to make a sacrifice, if I have to take less, people are willing to do that, is what I'm seeing.
I want to steer us back to performance and productivity, which you mentioned can be measured, of course. So, do you have recommendations for tracking and measuring performance in a remote or a hybrid workforce that doesn't encroach on privacy or erode the trust of your workforce that you're measuring? Because it can seem like I've been doing my work just fine. Why are you watching me? There have been many stories over the last couple of years about different types of tracking software that is a huge turnoff for a lot of employees who can just feel totally distrusted. TJ, I think this is something that you've looked at in measuring performance. Is that right? And
Yeah.
how that
We see those like when we're out and we're having conversations, whether it be, at my current organization or if you're, if I'm consulting someplace else and you're talking about it right now, like, yes, I'm at home. If I were to pan the camera, this way, there's a TV that's hanging on the wall. It's almost 3 o'clock Central Time. It's also fantasy football season. I know at 3 o'clock, ESPN is going to, I may want tips for the waiver wire, right? Can that be on in the background and I still be productive and do what I need to do? Yeah, essentially. But if we're doing one of the things where you're meeting with clients and you're doing type of stuff, we talk about the importance of like being on camera or, just doing other stuff too. Like I love in teams, they have like avatars. I think it's cool to kind of break it up throughout the day because sometimes it's just like a fun thing to do out there. But we all have also seen that person that's just never on camera. And so then it's like, are you present within the conversation and meeting, right? When we're talking about what you're willing and what you're bringing to that meeting set. And so I think Kelly talked about the people standing up and problem solving. If you're not in the arena, your voice isn't in the arena, and we've spent years since the call to action from a diversity standpoint, talking about not just diversity and what this diverse panel looks like, but then the thoughts and experience that all of us bring, right? If Michael isn't present within this conversation, then his thoughts, ideas, and what he brings to the team isn't there, right? And so sometimes being on camera and having those type of policies that really does go a long way because you're forced to be present within it, right? If I just cut it off and it's just a handsome photo of me, sitting there, like you don't know if I'm truly engaged and really offering what I could from a full capacity kind of standpoint. And so those are kind of where we're measuring and looking at stuff now. We're not saying like, hey, you got to be here to do this, but we are saying you need to be, present and accounted for. And we're saying it in a way where we're not saying to monitor you, we're saying it to maximize what it is that you bring to this team. You're so valuable. Your skills are so important that we need you engaged. And this is how we want, and this is how other people want you to be engaged with them.
Seema, I want to come to you next. Something that is beneficial to both employees and companies, which is what we're talking about today, is career development. Companies need their employees to grow, and employees want their careers to grow. They want to gain new skills. How do you do that when you have a distributed workforce And I hope you could also address how this is done for really young workers. Our youngest generation in the workforce today graduated during the pandemic and when folks were working remotely. And so they don't have the in-office experience that older generations do. How do you develop that talent?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question because for me, it is the one issue area that I think about daily, which is how do early career team members really get some of the unwritten skills, the unwritten rules of the workplace, right? I mean, things that you learn just by being together in person. But here's what I've really realized as I'm thinking about this. Um, you have to redesign. Because if we think about how can I replicate what I had in the workplace now, it's not going to work. It's a new time. We should continue to evolve. This is about career evolution. And so one of the things that we are looking to do is, okay, first of all, let's level set. Does everybody know the expectation on what skills we want you to have? What soft skills, what technical skills? Does everybody across the organization know what we expect? And do we expect the same thing for everybody? So that's something that we are partnering on to drive throughout the organization. What are our uh, core skill sets that we want? And then as it relates to the early career team members, how do we get them sort of mentored and guided from folks? We do encourage a lot of sponsorship in our organization as part of the diversity and inclusion educations I get to lead. That's one of the things that we talk a lot about is how are you sponsoring folks? If you're senior leaders in the organization, what does that look like? We have a mentorship program where we encourage people to mentor. And as part of career development conversations, we ask managers, make sure that your team is either mentoring if they want people leading experience or is being mentored by someone. If they're early career, that's going to be really key. You can do it remotely. And look, some of us need to be mentored in the remote environment. Other folks have it better. Maybe we've been in the career for a long time and we knew what to do in person, but it is important for us to understand how we're doing it as um, in a remote environment. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to define and develop people if you are re-looking at processes, re-looking at language, re-looking at how you develop team members in this environment. I think the mistake people make is they just try to use what worked and keep going, and that is not functional for today. It's just not going to work.
You mentioned sponsorship. Could you sometimes sponsorship or often sponsorship programs are more informal, where mentoring programs can be very
Mhm.
formal, there's matching going on. How do you do sponsorship?
So we don't have a formal sponsorship program to your point. And honestly, we've talked to a lot of places where some folks really love their sponsorship program and others it doesn't work as well. What we do is try to talk to the team about first of all, what is sponsorship? Sponsorship is different than mentorship. People don't always know that, but sponsorship is really taking somebody's career sort of under your wing, having the conversations about them in rooms where they aren't and don't have access to. So that's really important. And then teaching our team, why does this matter? You know, we talk about people who have sponsors, they feel that they work in a more equitable environment. They are more likely to move up to the next rung in the ladder. But all of these pieces are really important. And so we talk to the team about what does it mean to sponsor somebody? Can you just sponsor somebody for one thing? Let's say I don't know everything about that person. That's why people are afraid to sponsor them. Like, I know Seema is good at this, but she's not, I don't know anything about, this piece of her. So what I give people the advice is sponsor them for what you know, because you never know where that's going to take them. If you know they're really good at public speaking, sponsor them for that piece. Talk about them in rooms. Make sure they get an opportunity to present. Having those types of dialogues is really key, and it will help the early career people who are coming in, our team members who are coming in, to grow and develop. So I think that's, for me, defining sponsorship and then telling people how they can work with it's important.
Kelly, because you have a lot more in-office time with employees at Aflac, do you feel that it's easier for you compared to a distributed workforce to develop that early career talent? Do you have any strategies when your environment is a little more fluid and flexible than 5 days in office?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does definitely help for the early career that are in office and hybrid. We still have a remote population though that's outside the 50 miles, and so I think that's been a challenge too. Okay, we have some group that's hybrid, some that's on site, some that is remote. So how do you make sure you're catering to all of them? And what we really focused on when we changed our workplace location configurations was to think about management training. And okay, as a manager, you've got to be able to understand how you lead people in all these different configurations and making sure you're inclusive of everybody. You know, if you're having a Zoom call and you've got people in the conference room, you know, we went as far as testing all of our conference rooms out because we realized that it wasn't great for those that were remote. You know, they could maybe see one person and they had trouble hearing. So we really had to beef up the equipment and technology. And I think that's important to do if you're going to have a mixture of on-site and off-site employees so that everybody feels that they have the same seat at the table. But I do think it's really important though to think about your managers and how they are addressing it. Because otherwise that's your front line right there. So
I like what you said about going through and testing each of the conference rooms on site. I have definitely been the person on the call who's like, wow, I really love the whiteboard and I am hearing disagreeing voices. And it really does make a difference. Less personal. You kind of think, why do I have this screen? This feels really silly. So I think that's a really good policy. How do you, Michael, I'm coming to you next. How do you consistently upskill and reskill a workforce that is distributed? And how do you do so equitably? To Kelly's point, sometimes it's really hard to make sure that those outside the office are getting the same access as those within.
Yeah, that is tough. I wish I had the perfect prescription on how to fix for that. As far as finding the right skills for folks, I'll start with this. You got to have an inventory of what you currently have, right? And that's traditionally been real tough, right? You usually have to bring in the Deloittes of the world and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to map this out on spreadsheets to figure out that by the time they're done, it's kind of stale. So, obviously there's platforms like Eightfold out there, the talent intelligence platform that collects all this information, all this data on skills and makes recommendations to folks. So, I've been with this for about 5 years now and I've seen it work firsthand, where, someone comes to me and they say, hey, Mike, I want to be a senior director of customer success someday. And this is my current role. Maybe I'm an SDR, right? So, okay, let's understand the skills you have today. Let's understand that gap. And then let's put together a plan. So all of those were very, very tedious in the past. Now there's, technology like Eightfold and there's AI that helps you with that. But yeah, that's where our business is really booming with these large organizations, is just getting a grip on what skills do they have, and not just skills, but what skills adjacencies do I have? Because I've been on that side of the table where I've laid folks off to turn around and rehire them 6 months later because I didn't realize that they had this skill that I was then hiring for, and I had to pay them 20% more and give them an increase in stock. And yeah, and then I'm looking at myself going, what was I doing? Why did I let this person go? You had no intelligence. So that's how we're doing it. We're leveraging our platform that lays out these career paths for us and lays out and interacts with our learning and management system and recommends courses for us to take.
Seema, TJ, or Kelly, is any of you put a lot of investment or time and resources into skill development programs, training, anything like that? TJ?
We spent a lot of time, and I love what Michael just said. But one of the points that Kelly had mentioned around like the mentorship and the sponsorship, like we spend a lot of money and a lot of time on like our frontline leaders, right? Like when we can talk about remote work and we can talk about in the office, out of the office, what people are really doing, what the candidate in today's market is really doing, is they're picking who they want to work for, like specifically, like meaning I'm going to talk to a recruiter and I've had my recruiter hat on, like they know my pitch is going to be good. They want to get to Kelly. They want to understand, what am I going to be working on Monday through Friday with Kelly? What bullets am I adding to my resume by working with Kelly? What skill set am I doing? Like, what does my career map look like in my journey? And is this role going to help me get there? And then more importantly, like, do I want to work for Kelly? Like, period, right? And so I have managers that'll be like, hey, I've been hiring for 10 years. And I'm like, that's awesome. I'm like, how long have you been hiring in 2024? And then like, boom, we're in the middle of October. So there's like 8 productive weeks left of 2024. Like 2025 is going to be a whole different game. And so mentorship, sponsorship, interviewing, like leadership is not a title. It is a set of skills that can be trained and can be, looked at and can be worked on. And so to Michael's point, I may have, end of year reviews where they're talking about, this person's missing this person's missing this. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, but what are we highlighting and are we utilizing what they can do? Right. And if this is critical to their function, what's the plan for the next 6 months to get them this function, as opposed to you just sitting around being frustrated for the next 6 months and then putting them on the PIP when I'm now going to lose this set of skill sets that they did have because we didn't want as an organization to teach them the skill set that maybe we didn't even interview them for or they knew that they needed, right? And so it's really just elevating, having a much more, I say, intentional conversation about the skill set that you have, the skill set that you need for the future, and then maximizing those efforts. Because I'll just be very candid. I've had jobs where they interviewed me for a specific skill. I was really excited about bringing that skill to the organization. And then like 18 months later, actually even sooner than that, could have been like 18 weeks later, I was like, not only am I not using this skill, but like you're asking me to do something that we never talked about in the interview process. And then we're in, one-offs and manager meetings, and they're like, you don't look like you're enjoying it. And I'm like, this is not what I came here to do. Right. And then I mean, that was before I had kids, so I was a little bit more brazen. But I was a little bit maybe more risky with the career. But it was like, it was very demotivating. Like you're 6 months into a job and you're like, this is not what we said that we wanted to do and not the skill set that I wanted to do. So I think managers have to really be invested in, because not everyone is really supposed to be a leader. That sounds harsh to say, but also some people aren't really interested in being leaders. That was just a natural progression of their career because maybe they were like me and they got kids there in daycare and they're like, I got to be a manager so I can make more money. Right. So sometimes companies got to create better individual contributor roles to keep those people, but then also not to let them lead people that they're not interested in leading.
Just want to jump in if I can on that, which is, TJ, you said something that I think is really important. Expectations are different than they've been in the past. And that's not just about the hybrid workforce. That's about a generational change in workforce. So there is a much different expectation on how are you growing me? What skills am I getting? What am I getting to utilize? Whose team am I going to be on? And what do they do as a leader? All of those pieces are very different than they've ever been in the past. And so I would say that's a layer on to the hybrid conversation that maybe, folks don't realize, but we have to put all these things together. I mean, you can't just assume it's going to go one way. You really have to think about those expectations and how people have changed, what they're willing to say, hey, I'm okay, I'll stick with that for a while. And as you said, before you had kids, maybe it was easier, but still people are willing to say, no, I'm not interested in that and I'm ready to walk. I mean, that's true with the hybrid situation as well.
Or in the verse of it, hey, I'm interested in something, my organization's not willing to give me a shot, right? That's when in this gig economy, I'm going to start looking for other opportunities or, right. And I think that's where, this, to your point, Seema, right? It's a new age here, right? It's what we did in the past is no longer going to work here. We have to meet people in the middle.
But it'll also work in the hybrid. Like, so if I interview with, again, if I interview with Kelly and I'm like, yo, she's a dynamic leader. And I know by coming into the office, I'm going to get access to her. And that's going to help increase me because maybe that's the road in which I'm on. Then I'm in the office 4 days a week if I have access to Kelly. Right.
You know, TJ, it's really interesting that you say that because that's one thing I've become very intentional with is we used to eat lunch at our desk. And now I go down to the cafe and whoever's up in the office, we all go sit at the table together and we have, 45 minutes just to chit chat, right? And I've noticed there's a couple of employees that will come in on a Friday when this is like a ghost town out here. And they're coming in so they can go to lunch and have those conversations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think people are realizing that there are some opportunities.
Yeah, and just to add, it reminded me of something. One of the other things that we do is, right, our headquarters in Santa Clara, California, but we might have 15, 20 people in the New York City metro area by now, and we're encouraging those folks to get together for a day, whether it's once a month or once a quarter as a region, and get to know each other, right? Don't talk about work. Go have dinner, go have happy hour, go do Habitat for Humanity, whatever it is, go do a philanthropic event together. But, don't leave it up to corporate to drive all of this. If you have 3 or 4 people in a neighborhood, or, we got 5 or 6 people I know in the Atlanta area, they get together and they talk about things. And so don't always leave it up to corporate, right? If you are remote and you have some folks around you, take it upon yourself to coordinate some things of that. I mean, personally speaking, Eightfold, we pick up some of those costs for those remote employees, whether they want to get a WeWork office for the day to collaborate or whatever it is. Like, we'll help support that.
Is anybody making the case to employees that returning to the office is good for them, maybe for their well-being or career development? Kelly, it sounded like Aflac might be doing something like this, presenting that case.
We're trying to. We don't. I would say we probably need to be a little bit more organized with it. And I've gotten some ideas just even thinking through this session of what we can do. But it is important to talk about the relationships, being out of your home, talking to other people. So that will be a priority for us.
Yeah,
Seema,
we
oh,
talk
I'm
about
sorry,
it.
teacher.
I was gonna say we do the same. We talk about it. Like there's just benefits of it, right? Like I'm enjoying this conversation and like this is great, but like there's gonna be an absolute different energy if I can put my hand in Seema's hand and just say hi and have a conversation and talk about what it is that we're talking about, right? And so it doesn't have to be, 3 times a week, but if there's an opportunity to be able to do that, like I think the people that haven't experienced it, they don't know what they're missing. But I think those that are maybe like mid-career like me, like we understood the value of that when we were getting the opportunity to meet with somebody, have a lunch with somebody, or just be in the office in the presence of somebody, and they just ask, "Well, who was that?" And then boom, conversation starts.
Yeah, I think, and I know we're at time. I think, Emily, flexibility is key. It's key. So it's, making the case for people to come in the office, sure, once in a while, intentionally, absolutely. But it's key to figuring out how you need to work and how you come together to build community. That's going to be, for me at least, the way that we have that conversation.
I want to thank our panelists very much, Seema, Michael, Kelly, and TJ. Thank you for being here, sharing what's going on in your organizations and how you're making a really good case to employees to be in the office, at least sometimes. I'm going to kick it back to Steve at From Day One to introduce our next session.